Hello and welcome to the Your Life Unchained podcast. I am Rick Sheninger, your host. So happy to have you here with us. And also happy to have with us our wonderful guest today, Victoria Hardy. Welcome, Victoria. How are you?
I am great. How are you?
Doing great, thanks. So happy to have you. So excited to hear your story today. So, as you all know, this is the Your Life Unchained podcast where we talk about all the different ways that we overcome the challenges, both inside and outside of our own heads. We all struggle with something each and every day. And Victoria's here to share what she's overcome. So, Victoria, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Rick. I'm so grateful to be here. So yeah, I'm Victoria and I am based in the UK over here. I'd love to say sunny UK right now, but it's not. It's pouring with rain. And I'm a empathy specialist. I work in transformation for a large corporate company, but I'm a massive advocate around bringing ourselves to everything that we do. I talk a lot about that on social media, making real life stories easy to resonate with all the generations and disruptively making as much noise as I can around creating change for the next generation. So yeah, that's me.
And I see you're quite active on Instagram these days, doing all sorts of cool content out there.
Yeah. I like to have a bit of fun with it. I love to play about with the reels and write mini blogs and just share what's on my heart, share, stuff that just makes us beautifully human. I have 2 kids, what it's like to be living that world sometimes. And just day-to-day stuff, really, just showing up as me.
Awesome. Love that. So obviously you've overcome a lot of different challenges in your life. You're telling me that just over the last 18 months or so, you had kind of a turning point. So maybe you can give of kind of what led up to that, a little bit of a summary of some of the other challenges you overcome that led you to that turning point.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. And it's really interesting. You mentioned social media because I've just celebrated my first year on Instagram, which was really born out of my own healing journey from my own mental health illness, and which has been up and down over the course of my life. It didn't just happen 18 months ago, but I think 18 months ago, I really hit the bottom of maybe where I could be. And I know a lot of people don't like to sit in kind of like the suffering or the woe me, or say I suffered with anxiety or that I was in a dark place. But that's where I was. I really hit a brick wall at a time that was kind of just pre-pandemic. It was the November of 2019 now. We kind of forget that 2020 happened, right? We forget it was that long ago. But it was just really an end of a means of what had happened in my life. So there's lots of, like in anybody's life, we all go through stuff. So I had been through endometriosis for many, many years. I'd had 19 operations. I'd gone through becoming a parent quite young, almost being forced into that position because of my health. Not that I would ever take that back, of course. I love my children, very blessed to have them. But mentally taking on that and premature labour. I had lost 3 people close to me through suicide, and that was incredibly difficult to go through. And PTSD and my own, I think mental health is something, and mental illness is something that can come in and out of our lives. That's what makes us human. It's how we're reacting at the time to what is going on in our environment. And there was lots of things that had happened that I could kind of go into depth into more. But what I wanted to talk about was that, that came to a head. It came to a head in 2019 when, one day life just didn't make any sense to me anymore. I didn't feel like I had a purpose. I didn't feel like I was being a good mum. I didn't feel like I was being good at my job anymore, that I was being a good wife, that the mistakes that I'd made in my life had caught up with me. And I started to let the inner thoughts really take over and forget what was fact and let, how I believed I saw the world take over me and what was happening. But, not going into kind of that whole story too much, what really drove me that day when I didn't think I was going to make it through was my kids being in the car with me. One of them started to sing like he does, and just caught my attention for a moment to just think, oh my goodness, this is not how it's meant to be. And I dropped them off and I came home and I made a phone call. And in that decision, I just knew that I needed to talk. I needed to just express just start somewhere. I didn't know where it was going. I just needed to start to talk. And I was on the phone for 2.5 hours. And I was in therapy within the next 48 hours. And I just let it all out. And those years that had gone before, I really started to show up in those moments. And I started to really understand myself more. I'd always been really interested in self-development. I'd always been really resilient, so physically resilient with the condition that I'd had, physically resilient to put myself through difficult things. I'd had a hysterectomy 3 years before. My hormones were all over the place, which was definitely contributing, which is why I'm so passionate about talking about hormonal health in women. And there was lots going on, but I just knew that I needed to be resilient, just almost to continue, because there was something that I was being shown. There was something that I was being shown that why I needed to go through the things that I needed to do and how I was going to help to make them better for other people. And that was ultimately what kind of drove me really in the self-development, was everything around really getting under the skin of what had happened to me and why it was being shown to me, and how I could continue to then make that easier for the next generation, for people, that come after, and those around me, to help them through things as well. And that was kind of the driver.
Wow. So that really kind of shines a light on, a lot of people say, do what you're passionate about. But if you followed that, all the craziness you were going through, it wasn't really passion driving that, but it was definitely purpose driving that.
Yeah. And so ironic that you get to a point where you feel like you have no purpose, because I felt completely lost. And that could have been because of hormones at the time being imbalanced. That definitely happens. I was in surgical menopause, as I mentioned. But it could also just be that it had got to a point, there was just so much had built up. I had to deal with it. It was like, you need to deal with this to understand what your real purpose is. Because I was just on the notions, like we all are. Like, let's just get on, move on, adapt, overcome. Let's just go with it. And then suddenly I was without pain because that had been dealt with. So suddenly I was probably not sitting in the job that I needed to be in. My kids were getting older. They didn't need me so much. There's a lot going on. And suddenly it was like, well, what is my purpose? But it's really, as you said, when you're to the bare bone, you can build and you understand who you are. And I have learned in the last 18 months, really, again, doing some inner work with myself, what my real strengths are, understanding what do people come to me for, and I do have a way, that's why I'm an empathy specialist, of making stuff easy for people to understand, and just taking the stuff that's human and saying, that's my purpose, is to storytell some of this, is to just have those disruptive and difficult conversations that other people won't have, that we need our next generation to have, so that they can really home in and have some emotional intelligence and come out of, schools, colleges, unis, into life with their own emotional intelligence and really understand themselves, so that they don't get to 20 years down the line and then it hits them like it hit me,
Right. And it sounds like you help others have those difficult conversations too, not only drawing it out of them, but maybe helping them have difficult conversations with those that are close to them in their life. Is that true?
Yeah, I would say so. And it's probably not on a formal level, formal capacity. I'm not a therapist or I don't label myself a coach or anything like that, but definitely in and outside of work. I think when you show people the way of just showing up as you, and just being bold enough to take that step to share something that's real about yourself, it opens the door for them. And they say, okay, it's okay for me to do that too. It's okay for me to step there. So therefore they can either go and speak to somebody, or maybe it's just talking it out with me or a friend or another colleague or a family member, but they feel a little bit more confident. And sometimes some of us that are more happy to talk about stuff need to keep doing it, because that definitely paves the way for other people to do it. And it's like when I returned back to work, I didn't kind of go back quietly into the organization. I had 6 months off work, by the way, after that day. I didn't go quietly back in. I went back. I sent an email out to everyone telling them exactly what had happened, why I was off. And I just said, I'm not going to not talk about it. It's going to be there, whether I'm that annoying person or not. I'm sure I am to some people, but it's really important that we do that. And actually, we talk about ripples, right? Sometimes the ripples that created was phenomenal. The people that reached out to me, it was amazing. They said, I've been feeling like this, or I'm so glad that you shared that, because now I feel confident to do the same. And that's a magical thing, and that's what we need to keep creating.
So just real quick, because you said you're an empathy specialist. So just talk, because some people I think still confuse empathy and sympathy. Talk on that for just a minute.
Yeah, sure. So sympathy is something, that and empathy and sympathy we don't all have. We're not born empathetic, and there's this big debate of, can you teach empathy and so on, and the jury's still out, but we can certainly become more empathetic, and we can become aware a lot more. So sympathy is, when we are looking at a situation or a person, and we are we are almost feeling sorry for that person, or we are, understanding they've gone through something, but we're kind of almost feeling sorry for that person rather than putting ourselves right with them. So it's almost looking at the situation, and we can act on that, but it's acting from a different space. When you're empathetic to somebody, you really have the ability to be able to put yourselves with them in that situation, and it's about feeling what they're feeling. So and whether that's good or bad, it's about putting yourself there and really understanding maybe what they're going through, and that can be asking questions to them. It could be in the language that we use. It can be in how the actions that we take from it as well. So we're more likely to act on empathy than we are on sympathy.
Right.
So, yeah, that's the difference.
I think the best analogy of the difference I've ever heard, it's kind of crazy, but it's, picture somebody who walks by somebody who's stuck in a well. And they look down. Sympathy is, "Ah, you're stuck in a well. Oh, I'm sorry. I hope you get out soon."
Yes.
That's sympathy. Whereas empathy is, "Oh no, you're stuck in a well. I can't get you out, but I'm going to stay here until this is sorted out, until we get it."
Yes, you're with them. That's right. Yeah, and I love that analogy. It's a great one, and it's so true. And we use it in everything. I think where empathy is one of my top strengths, and it's having that ability to see things from the other person's point of view in everything that you do. I don't get it all the time, obviously. I'm just human, but in how people read stuff, or how we communicate together, sometimes we can layer things up in so much stuff. I don't know if I can swear on this podcast, but we can layer stuff up really unnecessarily. We see that a lot in the corporate world. Things get laid up because we have to feel like we're important, and we have to add extra confusing words in, and jargon, and make ourselves feel like we're a certain way. And a great sort of example of that is when you buy a house, right? So if you buy a house and you have to go through the process of the paperwork and the solicitors and the finance, I mean, my goodness, but we pay these people a lot of money, and they go through these reams of paperwork, and we're just like, we don't know what this means, and we're buying a house. It's a big purchase, and we're buying it because half of it's in Latin, whereas actually being able to cut through that and make that messaging of actually what's happening in that process really clear and simple. That's putting it into the shoes of the other person and being able to say, this is just how it is, and kind of cut through the mess really and keep it really simple. So yeah, that's what I do.
It makes sense. And it kind of goes back to perception, right? How you perceive other people's situation and whether or not you can relate. in a way that you can put yourself in their shoes, which, kind of brings me back to when you were having that struggle in November 2019.
Mm.
And yes, you're right. Like 2020, the whole year we spent saying, when will this year end? Now it's just, we just erased it from our memory completely.
Yeah.
but but in 2019, you had your own negative perception of yourself at that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how did that translate? Your own negative perception, how did that translate into the empathy that you now so is now such a strong part of your life?
That's such a great question. And, I'm very grateful for when I was in that place that one, had that drive and that's something in me to take action and whether that was from the past experience of thinking, I know how that feels like when somebody's not around. I need to, I can't do that. I also had a lot of help, obviously, with my family and friends and loved ones, which I'm eternally grateful for. But once I started to emerge back into the world, because it took me a long time. I hid away for a while, and I took 6 months off, and it gave me another lens. So I think we take our experiences and we build lenses around us, right? Almost like a fly with all these eyes. And we all have different ones. Again, that's what makes us all so amazing, because we have the ability to have your experiences are different to mine, Rick. So we can then share our experiences and our point of view, and we can connect and resonate with different people in different ways. So again, it was another lens that could build on, so that when I could see other people in that space, I could recognize it more. Or when I could see something that wasn't quite right, I could speak up more, because that's really important too, and use that, because it's about speaking up too, and calling out when something isn't right. Or being bold, because there's a part of being bold in saying, I think you need to talk about this, or, and actually going there with that conversation, because we don't do that enough either. Because knowing that actually inside, however that person that's going through something doesn't feel like they need it at the time, sometimes you can be that person to just unlock that moment in them. So yeah, it definitely built another layer. And I think it brought me back to the core that is who I am. And that's what my purpose was and is.
So it sounds like you were first led to a purpose, and now it's become a passion versus the other way.
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of highlight that real quick, because again, so many people talk about find your passion, and then, make it a business or whatever. And it doesn't always work that way.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's got to come from the core, the roots. So we can have lots of different things, and there's, we can all have lots of different careers. We're lots of different people at different times, aren't we? We can show up as ourselves always. We talk about showing up at work, showing up at home, in parenthood, or wherever you are. You're still the same person. You just put different, hats on, so to speak.
Right.
But it's what's underneath, and the foundation that's underneath, what's your core and your roots. And that's your purpose, and the passion is what's on the top, and how it shows out, and how it plays out.
Yeah, absolutely. So 2 different points in time that I want to circle back to. So first, I want to quickly circle back to that day you dropped your kids off, and then you came back and you made a phone call. How did you get through that day? I asked this just to give you some context from the standpoint of, we all talk about these things and we all kind of gloss over a moment in time.
Yeah.
I suspect that day is a lot more important than just glossing over and saying 2.5 hour phone call, and then I took 6 months off. Like, there's more to it than that. And not that you go into every single detail, but I just want to highlight again the significance of that, what it took to get through that day.
Yeah. So, and that car journey for me was such a pivotal point, because I wasn't a person that wrote out notes or had planned this. This had never entered. I think we all have moments where we say we don't want to be here anymore, or for goodness sake, like, honestly, just let this be because I've had enough. But it never had got to that point, it was a real moment where I talk about it like I just didn't want to press the brakes. And the sun was in my eyes, the kids were in the car, and that's a scary place to be in yourself, but also as a mum with your kids, if I had taken action on that. But yeah, driving home, I remember I was just so numb at that time. Talk about it like I couldn't hear the music. There was I couldn't see the beautiful things in, sunsets. I live by the sea. It's my favorite place, right? The beach is my happy place. I couldn't smell the salt in the air anymore. It was like I was totally numb. And I remember just feeling so numb, but just thinking, I just need to get home. Just need to get home. And then once I was home, I walked in through the door. My dog came to greet me. I always talk about him, was my little lifesaver, considering I wasn't a dog person, but he's sat right next to me now. And, they have a way of looking, and it was like he knew something and didn't leave my side. And I just came home, I picked up the phone. I'm really, really blessed to have the company that I work for. We have healthcare, and we have a employee service. So it wasn't like the Samaritans or anyone else that I rang, but I actually rang and used my family member as an excuse. It was like I was not ready to go. It was like I needed something to make the call. Does that make sense? So it wasn't like I was just going to ring up and go, oh, well, I just nearly did this. And that could have, it was like I needed to build that excuse in. So I actually and of course I knew that they were going to ask me the question about how I was. And that's all I needed. I just needed somebody to say, and how are you coping with that? And that's the question I needed to hear, so I could really answer it. And I remember standing at my kitchen side, and I stood there the whole time on the phone call, just I didn't even move. And I got through, and there was just so much that came out, and they just talked me through every step, which was obviously really, they're trained to do. And I had to just really sit in that for the rest of the day. I had to sit. I was alone. I was, my husband was at work. The kids were still at school. I wasn't picking them up that day. I think my parents, it would have been their day to pick up. And I think I texted my mum and just said, I need you to just hold the kids for me for a while. I'm not feeling well. They had no clue. They didn't know until later. And I just had to really sit within that moment and I guess just process and sit and go, right. But I think after I'd done that, there was such a weight lifted. It was like a physical weight. I knew there was a long road ahead, and I knew there was lots of work that I had to have done, but I was so ready to do it. Right. I was like, we're ready. And I knew it would be hard and raw, and, there was a lot to come, but it was definitely a weight lifted. And then I remember taking my dog out for a walk and just walking for hours. And then my husband came home, we talked. And then, as I said, within the next day, and I just had the mantra each day, pigeon steps, each day, pigeon steps, small goals. Because I'm a real, let's do this and this. And I have a creative brain, right? So you're automatically thinking 20 years in advance. And I had to really wire my brain back to just each day, just each day. The rest is a bit of a fog.
As you just pointed out, it really comes down to that first step. And there's so many people who have a hard time making that first step. And even you struggled with making the first step. In fact, you used another family member as the reason to have somebody help you make that first step. And I wanted to again point that out because I think it's important, because there's a lot of people that I'm sure are in that position that, I'm stuck. I don't know what to do next. I need to take the next step and I don't know how, or I'm scared. And it's okay to be scared, and it's okay to not know how to do it. And again, kind of like, you said, don't think for 40 years in advance. Think, what's the very next step?
As simple as that. Yeah.
And maybe the very next step is figuring out how to take the first step. That could be the first step.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. And I always talk a lot, I was asked the other day about, what my 3 tips with mental health or keeping yourself right. And, that is one of them, is just to make that decision to just speak, to just talk, that first, and it doesn't matter really who it is to, whether it's to a helpline or to a family member or a friend or to a stranger, because that often it's the release of getting that off of your chest, that it's there, it's out there.
Right.
And then it's like, and then you can assess where you are. Is it something that you need to deal with, or was it that you just needed to just get it out? How deep does it run? But making that first conscious decision and just taking step by step, not thinking too big,
Right.
that's why. And I still have to do that now, we're 18 months on. 2 weeks ago, I had 2 panic attacks. They hit me.
Oh, wow.
I didn't expect them. It had been a long time. It was a bit of a stressful time, a stressful week. And, they creeped up on me, and then they were, but I had gathered enough tools in my toolbox to really be able to handle and focus. And of course it was kind of like, you feel like you're stepping backwards a little bit, but equally, you know what to do. We know what to do.
Right.
We know that if we can just say, I just need to make that one step, and that's all we need to do in that moment. And we can pull on the tools, and, there's always light. There's always somebody that's going to help. There's always somebody, nothing is unfixable.
And again, I mean, you mentioned here that having a couple panic attacks felt like stepping back, but having the tools to kind of work through it at the time, light years ahead of where you were. Because
Absolutely.
had that happened 18 months ago, that would have been a major spiral at that point. But going forward, you won't be better equipped to maybe anticipate the onset of that. But it doesn't. But it's all part of the process. It's all part of those what do you call them, pigeon steps?
Yeah, pigeon steps. So yeah, and that's so true. So you have the, on one side, you have the tools, or the, when you're in that moment. And then I think when you become more self-aware and you go through this stuff, you become reflective. So you look back. So it's really important as part of the process. And if anyone's listening who's in that process, I started to journal about 4 months into my healing process, where I started to follow the bullet journal method. I mean, you can just write on anything, right? But that worked for me. And so that made me much more reflective on reading back over the months and realizing how far I'd come, because that's important too. So that when I did go through those panic attacks, yes, it wasn't great, but I was in the weirdest way, I was sitting in them comfortably, because I knew that I was going to be okay. And I knew that I was working through the tools. And then of course, when I, the day after, reflected back and thinking, okay, we got through that and it wasn't as bad as we had before. And, yeah, it's always good to reflect and see where you come from.
Right there. That's super important. Look back. And I always say, look back to learn, look ahead to lead, and look in the moment to live.
Yes. I love that. That's great.
Because I think it's so important. There's too many people that try to live in the past, or they set these goals and they live with such anticipation of the goals that when they actually reach the goal, let's say going on vacation is a great example. Like, oh yeah, I can't wait to go on vacation, can't wait, and the anticipation so far exceeds the actual experience, because the vacation's there. It's like, oh yeah, this is great, cool. Now it's over.
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah, it's so true. And we all fall into that trap at times, don't we? And whether that's just general and we're, and our mental health is really great, or whether that's we're really living in a moment of anxiety. We know that anxiety is either in the past or in the future. Anxiety doesn't work in the present, which is why mindfulness is so amazing. And you have to bring yourself to the present when you're in that anxious state, because anxiety cannot fester in the present. But yeah, just day to day, I think it is so true. And our society is set up in a way that we're either always looking forward or we're looking back, even with memories coming up on Facebook that constantly remind us that our children are not little anymore, or that great, like you said, that great holiday that we had. or the expectation of what we should be when we grow up, or the expectation of what like you said, that holiday or that Christmas or that wedding, or what my life will be like. We forget about ourselves and how we're growing right there, what we're living, and that's actually the bit that I'm most passionate about, in grabbing the youth and these amazing kids and teenagers and young adults that are coming into this world and living through it right now, is grabbing them and helping them understand their emotional intelligence and understanding how they are in that moment and how that's going to help them with their future.
Right. And you just brought up another good point. And with Google and Facebook, bringing up memories, and that kind of also comes back to perception, because we can look at that and say, "Oh, our kids aren't little anymore," or uh, and feel sadness or remorse, or we can look at it and say, "Hey, this is what I learned in that moment," or "Hey, look, I captured that moment," because that memory wouldn't be there without having captured it. So, hey, I captured that moment. Oh, that was a great moment, and you can relive it just in that, for that moment, re-experience it. And you don't have to look at it through the lens of remorse.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
part of the mindset, and it's a challenge that we all face also.
Yeah,
We
absolutely.
have just a couple minutes left, but there's one other question I wanted to ask, and it really came back to when you went back to work, talked about the ripples, and you talked about how much outreach. And I'm just curious if there were any people that initially seemed resentful or seemed negative, their response seemed negative, that then turned around. You know, because I guess my thought process there is, there could very well have been people that were going through that same thing and feeling stuck. They were resentful because you came out the other side and they were still stuck. And I'm just wondering if you experienced that at all with other people.
I'm not sure if I experienced it in knowing that that's how they felt. And that may be because we weren't in an office environment. So remember when I went back, it was mid-pandemic.
Right.
Everybody was kind of, I was returning to work and phasing whilst homeschooling, and there's lots of stuff. So everything was done either virtually, email, as it still is for us right now. But I did have a shift, a change in actually how we respond when people are off work. So, for example, when I was off, I went on holiday when I was off sick. I actually went to Rome. It was the best thing that I could have done. I didn't want to go. It was just before the pandemic broke out, actually. COVID had just hit Rome. And I didn't want to go. So I'd never been away without my kids before, let alone get on an airplane. It was the best thing I did. I totally love that city, recommend it to anyone. And it was a real place of healing. But there was definitely some judgment around, oh, hang on a minute, she's off sick. So why is she going here? Or why is she in the gym? Or why is she eating cake with friends or family when she should be at work? Because I was obviously signed off. And that was definitely a taboo. And actually, that really got to me at first because I felt really guilty. It took me a long time to settle into that. And then I really thought, hang on a minute. If I was off with a broken leg, I would have to go to physio. I would have to go to the gym to train my leg. I'd have to build some strength. Nobody would say, oh, hang on a minute, she's off for 4 weeks because she can't drive to work. But that's okay. She can go and sit in the cafe and have some cake. Yeah, exactly. Because, right? So again, it was like, but hang on, if it's a mental issue, then we suddenly have a different viewpoint. And it's suddenly a stigma. And it's like, yeah, perception. So it's definitely like that. Hang on a minute, she's mentally ill. She can't go on holiday. She can't go away. They didn't realize what I was going through to get myself on that plane, the panic attacks that I had, everything else. Right. But actually, that was and my therapist was saying to me, you need to go. But it was such an important part of my healing to do that, because it took me away from the UK. It took me away from my family. It made, it allowed me to talk to my mum for the first time, really talk to her and tell her how I was feeling. It allowed me to be in this amazing place of history. And I talked about that a lot when I came back, and there was some apprehension, and I have seen that kind of mood slightly change now. So we're not quite there, we're not there yet. I'm not going to pretend I've changed the world. But again, those small ripples of just challenging those conversations and saying, isn't it great that I saw, so and so on Facebook, and they're taking some time out to be with their friends when they felt really mentally poorly. That's really great that they're going out and having those conversations and people saying, oh, yeah, right, I get it. So, probably more in that sense than what you were first mentioning. But, I hope that kind of helps. But that's probably what I felt more. And maybe not the other, but maybe just because it was more of a virtual scenario.
No, that makes sense. Well, surprisingly, we've reached the end of our time. But thoroughly enjoyed all of the insights, all of the great shares that you shared with us. Thoroughly enjoyed this. So if anybody wants to get in touch with you or find you, how can they do that?
Okay, so yeah, I'm on Instagram. I'm known as Ginge Unhinged, so it's Ginge _unhinged, where you'll see my messy mind played out in just being me, but in a a way that resonates, like I talk about. So we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm on LinkedIn too as Victoria Hardy. I don't really do Facebook too much, so that's the two platforms you can find me mostly.
Awesome. And they'll be in the show notes as well. Well, Victoria, I cannot thank you enough. Thank you so much for being here. Thoroughly
Thanks for
enjoyed
having me. Been great.
it. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. This has been Your Life Unchained. And once again, have a wonderful day.